Startups begin in communities across the country.
Why does Silicon Valley get so much credit? My name is Nick Kastner.
And I'm Caitlin Clays. We're interviewing the people building startup communities across America.
But in the areas no one is talking about, the middle.
This is the Ecosystem Builder Podcast by mug.news. This is the Ecosystem Builder Podcast. Ecosystem building is the subset of economic development that focuses on fostering entrepreneurial activity within a community. Today's guest is Alexces Bartley from Kansas City, Missouri. She's the director/network builder at Missouri Source Link. Alexces, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hi, thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So jumping into my first question is, how did you first become involved in your startup community?
Yeah, so my startup community is the state of Missouri. And so I came to Missouri it's now almost 3 years ago. I was born and raised in Oklahoma. And so I took a big jump and changed jobs and came to work for Missouri Source Link. And that was actually my first introduction into Missouri entrepreneurship. Let alone, the different communities that exist throughout our state. But had been working in entrepreneurship support before that in my home state of Oklahoma, working, with different regional ecosystems and just trying to build connections, build awareness about, what was out there and who was doing what to help entrepreneurs and what entrepreneurs needed. And did that for about 3 or so years as well, before coming to Missouri and taking a deep dive into this ecosystem.
So what drew you to entrepreneurship specifically?
My dad owned his own business. And so I wouldn't say I grew up thinking, he's an entrepreneur. I didn't have that title or that word in my head. But when I graduated college, I started working actually with a staffing company. And my role in that company was to work with the businesses and understand what their needs were. And of course, we were focused on workforce needs and HR, but it really, I guess, whet my appetite for hearing what these smaller local businesses needed to help them grow or, make it through an off season or something like that. So just having those conversations and getting to know that community in the city that I was in at that time, I think really piqued my interest. And then it just so happened that, networking and working with different businesses, I met some people at an entrepreneurship center in Oklahoma and started realizing there's an entire industry and career field out there dedicated to providing support or preparing people to start and operate businesses. And that was just really exciting to me to see, what people were working on and getting to meet entrepreneurs, right, who are taking that leap. It's always exciting just to get to work with entrepreneurs. I think they're fascinating people. I won't claim myself to be an entrepreneur, but so it just kind of happened. But I'd say I always worked with businesses and just kind of found my way into, startups.
So just by listening, I can tell you're a very people-oriented person. You sound very intrigued and fascinated with the stories people can tell, and connecting others is like a great reason why you're a good ecosystem builder. And I think it's very entertaining that you say, I'm not an entrepreneur. So welcome to the Ecosystem Builder Podcast. But it's really interesting to kind of hear that perspective and how our definitions can be so flexible and change over time as well. So being that you are a people connector, you're a listener of storytelling, how do you support the Missouri entrepreneurship community?
You hit the nail on the head when you said, you're people oriented, you are a connector. That's exactly what we do at Missouri Source Link. Just put some technology also behind that. But what we do is at our core, connect the entrepreneurs or anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur with the resources that they need to start and grow those businesses. And with a specific focus, right, on identifying the right resources at the right time. So trying to help people just navigate, one, what's available, two, which resources or organizations provide the services that your business needs at this particular stage in your development, and just cutting down on any maybe frustration or just, there's just so much out there that can be daunting at times. And I think having someone to just help say, hey, here's who you should talk to. They provide the services that you need. So the connection piece is core. But also, I mentioned these resources, these organizations that are out there. It's also about connecting those organizations and activating those organizations to strengthen the ecosystem in their communities. And that connection is also ecosystem building, right? Loosely kind of grouped organizations that are, out there supporting entrepreneurs and businesses and doing their things is great, because at the end of the day, as long as the businesses are getting the help they need, that's what's important. But if you can connect those organizations and build, collaborative initiatives, then, you can get so much more done, but that's such a benefit to the entrepreneurs to have all of those organizations working together in their best interest.
I can really hear the collaboration, and I'm just imagining inviting all these different people into a room and seeing how all of you can support each other and provide those resources. And I definitely can see where the education and providing structure comes in, because you'll find so many people who are very passionate about their idea, care about helping people. But like you said, it's daunting. It can be a bit overwhelming when there are opportunities, or if you just don't know where to look either, that can be really difficult as well.
Yeah, daunting, I think, is something I hear a lot from the businesses, right? Or, you're busy, you're launching a company, or you're, trying to make sure that company stays profitable or in operation. And, there's a lot of DIYers out there, right? And you can certainly, especially with internet access and things like that, you can do your research, you can find that information. But when you're short on time, and especially if, cash flow is something you just don't want to spend a lot of that, helping to find the free and low cost support that you need, that can make all the difference, especially in, a business that's trying to just get up off the ground, or maybe saving their dollars so they can grow and invest into the company. The help there to the entrepreneurs, just knowing that those things are out there, one is helpful. But if you're just thinking about maybe starting a business, how comforting is it to know that, okay, in Missouri's case, there's nearly 700 or so different organizations that can help you with various aspects of your business, and they're all doing it for free or for very low cost. So, that's a no-brainer, right?
So then, from an outsider's perspective looking in, what is something someone wouldn't know about Missouri as the state and Missouri Source Link, and how they support entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so Missouri is a really diverse state in that we've got some really large metropolitan areas. Those our two largest metropolitans span two different states. So in St. Louis, you've got Missouri and Illinois, and in Kansas City, you've got Kansas and Missouri. That's unique all on its own. But it's a very large state, and there's a lot of more rural communities in between. We've got some areas that are, I'd say smaller micropolitans, but then we've got areas of Missouri that are very rural, and, you're getting down into the Ozarks where you're also very isolated geographically. But what's interesting, at least to me, startups, new businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs, however you want to phrase them, right? I use the word entrepreneur pretty broadly. But but they're everywhere, right? And all of these businesses need help. So that in and of itself is unique. And the different resources that exist in each of those communities and how the different communities are supporting businesses in their area is in a lot of ways, yes, businesses have like same core needs, but you've got established industries and different, different hometown feels. And these communities are all supporting their entrepreneurs in different ways that make sense for their economy. One example that I was very fascinated by this, and I had the opportunity, especially when I first started with Missouri SourceLink, to travel around the state and really try to get to know these communities and what's happening. And in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, which is southwestern Missouri, but in the Ozarks, they have a incubator that is focused on manufacturing businesses. And not to say that that's entirely unique, that there's no one else in the world doing that, but and having that conversation with the organization that was running that incubator, they said, we looked at, how can we support entrepreneurs? And, for them, like focusing on tech startups wasn't going to be their priority because at that point, there weren't a lot of technology-based businesses. But what they did have was a lot of different manufacturing. And so that's where they put their money and their efforts to doing some of the business coaching, to actually providing place and, some assistance with equipment and training. And those are the type of businesses that they are growing and catering their support to, because that's what their community did. And that's, where their strengths lied. So I think just having that diversity, in our geographies makes Missouri really unique in that its individual startup communities are all wildly unique.
As a person who's visited Missouri, love it. But you'll definitely see, like, for example, St. Louis, and as in addition to the different rural communities you're talking about, completely different vibe. And to know that your state supports you regardless of if you're in a big city and, have all these things in one place, you don't feel like you need to go to a big city in order to be supported. And so that's very important, and it's very interesting to hear how Missouri SourceLink is able to provide some of that structure and resources. So then a question that I have next is, speaking of resources and support, sometimes, the finances come in, and that can be pretty daunting and pretty intense to handle. So I was wondering then, are there any local grants or eligible for any interest-free loans? Wow, maybe I'll ask that question without stuttering. Yep. But yeah, so are there any eligible for local free grants or loans or anything?
So interest-free loans, I'd have to say, I really don't think so. And if someone is listening to this and they know about some interest-free loans, tell me more. There's and grants, right? Grants are always free. There's definitely a lot of grant opportunities. Loans as well. We think a lot about, for entrepreneurs, right? You can get a traditional bank loan, but not everyone is deemed bankable. Whether that's, credit history, low credit score, or a lot of times for businesses, they don't have the assets to minimize the risk for the bank. And so it's just a little risky for those commercial institutions. And so thinking about alternative loans, right? So maybe your revolving loans or a micro loan from a CDFI or some other organization. There's plenty of those in Missouri. Oh, okay, I won't say plenty. There could always be more, right? But something in Missouri we looked at, we did a deep dive into this in 2018. looking across grants, debt, and equity capital for early stage businesses. And we wanted to know what exists. That's kind of a lot of what Missouri SourceLink does, right? Mapping, identifying what are these resources, where are they at, so that you can connect entrepreneurs to them. But when we're looking at capital, there was, especially regarding loans, there's a number of different alternative loan funds situated across the state. But what we found is a large portion of those were not being heavily utilized. They weren't being accessed by the entrepreneurs. And so that's something, we as a state and our different partners are looking at how do we fix that. But they're definitely out there. Again, it's all about, it comes down to visibility and awareness of what's there. So there's definitely alternative loan capital out there for early stage businesses. I think one type of organization that often holds these funds and that businesses might not always think about is your regional planning commissions. What are those?
I was going to say, what are those?
You think about, I think chambers a lot of time are people's first thought of, when you go and you want to start a business in a new community or you want to get involved and network with businesses, you go to your chamber, right? And every chamber is different, but along that same vein, right, chambers are focused on economic development. A lot of times that's focused on attraction of new businesses that, come with a lot of jobs and retaining those businesses, also retaining your local businesses. But then you've got regional planning commissions and economic development corporations, again, all focused on economic development. But these entities are typically thinking about regional strategy. So it's not just for one city. They're, multi-county or however they're divided up. And so they're also the entities that are typically applying for these large federal grants that maybe aren't available to businesses, but they're available to government entities, tribes, public schools, whatever that may be. And they can pull down these funds, and wherever they're coming from federally, there's some designated use behind those. And a lot of these federal programs have, where you can use that money to support businesses, whether it's providing technical assistance or direct funding. And so they set up these revolving loan funds for businesses because it's a way to spur economic growth. But again, it's not always people's first thought to go and look for these funds at an organization like that, because prior to knowing maybe that they have some funding for small businesses, most businesses aren't dealing directly with their regional development group. And so I think there's just a lack of awareness there about that they exist among a lot of businesses and what they do, but they're a great asset actually for finding not only just loans, but also grant opportunities and pulling that money into communities to use to support small businesses.
Speaking of community building and community interaction, if someone were to move to your community or Missouri as a whole and wanted to start a business, what would you suggest is the first thing they do?
I know this is going to come as a shock. No, but I firmly believe this too. I really would say you contact Missouri SourceLink in Missouri because that's one of the reasons why this organization was established and why it works is because we've taken the time to, identify all the resources that support small businesses, at what stage of business, their services, I'll rephrase that, what stage of businesses they serve, what type of businesses they serve, because resources tend to cluster around the type of entrepreneurs that they serve. Not every resource that's out there is right for every business. anyways. And so when you're looking to start a business in Missouri and you don't know where to go, or even, well, how do I even register in the state? Does the state have any weird requirements? Missouri SourceLink can help get you started and connected and let you know where to go. And that helps you then start to build that maybe local network and system of support. It's definitely not the end all be all, right? But it's, especially if you're not sure where to go, it's a central access point that kind of opens up all of Missouri. I mean, I firmly do believe that when you come to Missouri, it's a great perk that we have something like Missouri SourceLink, but I know not everyone that's going to listen to this podcast is in Missouri. So what would you do? I think generally speaking, find your small business development center. Every state has a network of these. Connecting with those folks, they're generally pretty aware of other organizations that support, because they'll help walk you through, starting the business, growing the business, and connect you along the way. So I always think that that's a great place to start. Really, any of your, I promise that I'm not getting paid to do this, any of your SBA affiliates. So Small Business Development Center, SCORE, Veterans Business Resource Center, Women's Business Centers. I think generally always a good place to start, but also just do a quick Google search and see, like, when you Google startup or new business, enter your community name, what pops up? Check out, go to a networking event, go sit down in a co-working space and just see what they're doing, because there's generally events and different things going on. And that's how you'll start picking up on who's doing what and how are they working with businesses, plus just getting connected with other entrepreneurs in your community.
I think it's a very clever approach to do to find those categories that you might check mark in. So like you said, women, veterans almost, I'm sure that's a very clever way to go through your Google search. Because like you said, there's so many things you can search of entrepreneurship. Saying broad field entrepreneurship, Missouri, I'm sure a ton of things are going to come up. So I bet it can be a little intimidating of filtering through what don't you do. But Facebook groups, is that something you would recommend that might exist in areas?
Yeah. And I think Facebook I'm a millennial, I'm an elder millennial, but I think Facebook is something that everyone uses to some degree. And maybe Gen Z doesn't love Facebook. It's not their favorite social media, but Facebook groups, Facebook events, at least in the Midwest, I think we utilize that pretty heavily. And so, I use the Facebook groups as well. I mean, you can do a simple search on Facebook to say, startups, again, your community, or entrepreneurs, your community, hiring, whatever. There's groups for everything. And just join those, ask questions. Everyone, I feel like Facebook, I use it for the groups more now than I ever have before. But it's full of people who they're asking questions, they're responding to questions. And, to learn from people, especially in your community, who are doing this same thing or have already been operating a business, they're going to be a wealth of information for, who did they work with to get support on this thing, or, just leaning on their experience and their social networks, like in real life, their networks, to start building your own. So absolutely, I'm a big fan of the social media groups.
Yeah, I believe that has definitely changed, just as an observation as well. So I'm at the very tail end of millennials, so it depends on who you ask if I'm a Gen Z or a millennial. But essentially I'm on the tail end, and I've noticed that for me in using Facebook, I've not used it so much as a social media platform so much as I've used it for business networking. I am in multiple like voiceover groups and like Facebook groups, and it's because of like advice like this. Like, I had no idea that you could use and utilize Facebook for your business, and we've grown so much into social media that a lot of businesses are incorporating all their socials. Like, every single business has a social, essentially, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And I've even come to find out that there are some businesses that use TikTok now to promote their business. Have you met anyone that kind of has that going on?
I've not directly. I think a lot of businesses are. I think you're absolutely right. I haven't made the jump to get on TikTok, but you're right. And thinking broadly about what is a business, you have to build up your brand, right? People have to know you exist. And so wherever people's eyes are at, that's where you need to be talking about your business and advertising your business. And social media, I mean, we've all got that phone in our pocket consistently throughout the day. And so any social media that you can get on, great. Some advice that was given to me, and I would impart this on others too, is be thoughtful about what social media platforms you're on and advertising your business. And I'm not a social media expert, but I've heard enough to repeat this, is different platform. People utilize those platforms for different things, right? Instagram, you really want to go on and look at pictures. Yes, there's video component, but again, how are people engaging with that platform? And that's, you have to almost market your business or your brand differently on each platform. Messaging is different on Twitter versus LinkedIn or Facebook. And so being thoughtful and purposeful about what social media platforms you're going to use, I think is a good practice, because also there's a lot of platforms out there, right? And so I think it can be quickly become overwhelming to try and maintain that. And you have to consistently be putting out content if you want to get eyes on you. And it takes time to put that information together, right? So even if it's just starting slowly, thinking about which platform is going to be right for me. But I think you said something earlier that Facebook for business that's commonplace now. I mean, use it to connect socially. And I think utilize those Facebook groups, right? For, connecting with people around a common topic. But man, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, they give you great analytics on your business to tell you who's looking at your information. Where are they clicking through? Where did they find your information? And I mean, you can put some money behind advertising on those platforms, but otherwise that information is free. That's free insight to who is interested in your product and are you effectively engaging them? And that's, I love data. So anything that can tell me, who's my target market, take advantage of that, like pull in all of that information and then use that to build a presence on a different social media platform. But now you know who's interested in your product. And so kind of build on that and however else you have to use it. But
to kind of build on what you said too, is you have a very good insight on saying like the writing, for example, the format, it like is different from, again, like you said, to LinkedIn, to Facebook, to Twitter. What I do kind of reflect on sometimes is entrepreneurship has changed so much from in the 90s all the way to current day. And one of the things I think about sometimes is that, we were here before social media, before Facebook, before Twitter, etc. And I remember, like, if I were to tell my younger self that it's like, oh yes, Twitter and Facebook is going to have businesses use it as a marketing platform, as an advertising platform, because it is affordable when you're first getting started, I would have laughed at myself so hard, because I remember thinking that it was insane that our president had a Twitter, and that was Obama at the time. I was like, why does the president have a Twitter? And that's
he should be spending his time on.
Right? But that was just how our first view of social media was. It was just completely different than what it is used for today.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, if you're not embracing social media, please start. It's low cost, and frankly, that's just where things are headed. So yeah, definitely, if it's take a workshop, ask a friend who's doing it, spend extra time, a few hours in the evening, like teaching yourself, Google it, whatever you have to do. But yeah, start playing with it. I mean, you can only get better. But in the meantime, it's not really going to cost you anything. So why not? I think that's something, not just social media, but in 2020, one of among many hurdles that were thrown at businesses, right, was because of the lockdown or shutdowns and, city mandates of, quarantining, and a lot of individuals moving from working from home, everything went virtual. You weren't able to have the walk-in traffic. And so there was a real need for businesses to go online. And most businesses, you think about, like, surely everyone has some sort of online presence, but that's just not true, right? Especially for our Main Street businesses, they didn't have a website, or if they did, maybe some online presence, maybe Facebook or something. They did not have it set up in a way, or they really needed to up their game on how do we interact with our customers? How do we sell online? And I mean, I think in just the day and age that we're in, should probably be thinking about that regardless of what your business is. How are you engaging virtually? Because that's where people are. But then also, how do you sell that product or that service online? And that's something that I think a lot of businesses, we've all taken for granted of, you don't have to, but that's something that we saw a lot of businesses then really rushing to try and figure out, who can help me with this? I need to develop some skills of my own, but also just the infrastructure pieces for that, right? How do you sell on Facebook? It's not even Facebook Marketplace, but how do you sell a business from a business page? How do you sell products? Can people do a live shopping with you? That was something I learned through all of this. That is a capability of Facebook. If you're on a live, if you have it set up properly, and I don't know how to do it, but through the comments, if you're showing some merchandise or something, and someone who's viewing that live, if you have the infrastructure and whatever plugins, someone can comment buy, and it will connect with your inventory system, subtract that from your inventory, send that person an invoice. And they're connecting with their customers and they're moving product. And I thought that was just a fantastic thing that more businesses were learning. And I learned it too. I had no idea. And I work with entrepreneurs, so I didn't even know that was something I could tell them to look into. So we're all learning constantly.
Yeah, I think that's very cool that our software has changed to be something like, I'm used to Facebook Market, where it's like the first person to comment, or the first time I look at the comments is when the person wins it. There's an auction company called Charity Event Auctions. They're based out of Minnesota, but one thing about their business is that they are able to do live auctions via virtual. So that's open, so it's in real time, and so it's kind of like playing off the idea that Facebook kind of did. I didn't know that Facebook had this kind of thing. So that's what jogged my mind as I thought of charity event auctions.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know about that. But yeah, anything that you can do virtually and not to say you have to do only virtual, but to supplement, I mean, that's a way to reach a wider audience base, right? Or audience customer base, where, if you're especially a Main Street business, and your client base is typically, people that live in your community. They know you because they physically see your storefront when they, drive by or whatever that is. But I mean, social media, I shop on Instagram, right? Like there's apps for that. Like I take screenshots of things that I like, and then it pops into another app and tells me where to buy it. Like you can do that. And so that's allowed me even to find businesses that are not in my area that I love, right? And I'm a consumer of their products now, and I would have never found them had it not been for, Facebook or whatever suggesting it to me. So it's just a great tool to help you grow your business. Is this a social media podcast?
Yeah, welcome everyone. This is the Ecosystem Builder podcast where we talk about TikTok and all them.
Yeah. Well,
I'm just joking, but I'm like, are we going to use the TikTok insignia in the thumbnail? Just kidding.
It's clickbait. Yeah.
Yeah. Clickbait. Oh, geez. Well, so definitely talking about how pandemic has made things way more digital. You again mentioned that you're doing business with vendors who you haven't necessarily seen in person. You saw it on Instagram. You love what you saw, so you purchased it via online. So, like you said, this is being way more present in virtual media that we have now. So then my next question then is, from your perspective as an ecosystem builder, are there any news outlets, podcasts, or blogs dedicated to cover startups in Missouri that you recommend people take a look at?
Yeah. So a couple that do look statewide, but I think looking regionally, there's probably a lot more examples to give. And so there's newspaper plus digital publication. And I think these exist in a lot of communities, but in Missouri, the Business Journal, Business Journal has a publication in 3 different areas of the state. And they've been great about writing about startups and writing about the ecosystems. But also, in Kansas City, there's Startland News. That's what they cover, right? Startups, news about startups. And they're all local. St. Louis, and I know you had a guest a few weeks back from St. Louis that mentioned, STL Made and Entrepreneur Quarterly. There's a group out of that kind of serves West Central Missouri, and again, somewhere where you wouldn't think to look, but everyone's trying to tell the story of entrepreneurs in their community. And this is a community action organization, so a government-led entity. And they have created a newsletter that they're telling the regional stories of entrepreneurs in this rural communities of West Central Missouri. They've started a podcast to talk about startups, but also just kind of everything, economic development in rural communities. And sorry, one more I'll plug is the Missouri Business Alert. So a cool thing about this organization, they report on startups all over the state, but they are based out of the University of Missouri in Columbia, so Mizzou. And it's student journalists. And of course, they're supervised, they have the faculty with them, but they're doing the reporting, they're doing the podcasts, they are monitoring the ecosystem and finding the stories. And they do a great job. And it's a really quality publication. And then also Missouri SourceLink, that's part of our goals as well, or activities that we focus on, is building the awareness and the brand that Missouri is a place for startups, and telling the story of those who are out there doing it, I think is great for just one, telling people, like you said in the beginning, you can start businesses in the Midwest, you can start businesses in Missouri, and anywhere in Missouri. you can start a tech business in rural Missouri. You can, do whatever you want. And so I think that, there's definitely a lot of organizations, entities that are telling the stories of their entrepreneurs and their startup community. And I think that that's fantastic. Everyone should be telling this story because it also inspires others, right? If you see a story of an entrepreneur in a town similar to yours doing their thing and having some success, that's going to encourage you to say, okay, if they can do it, I can do it, right? So there's a handful for sure, but I think I hit on most, at least off the top of my head.
Absolutely.
Forgive me, anyone who's listening, if I didn't mention it.
I know, it's always I forgot. There's just so many resources in my state. So absolutely. And if there's anything, again, that if you want me to mention anything else, I'm sure I could put it in the description or anything, so you can let me know later. But again, thank you so much. You have had some incredible input.
That's kind of what's hard about talking about startup communities from a state level perspective is all these communities, there's so many resources in each one of them. And to just answer the question about talking about who's out there telling the story and writing about entrepreneurs, again, if we took a microscope and looked at a singular community, it'd be a lot easier answer to give. But there's also just going to be ones that I don't know about even. And it's my job to know, but there's just some things that you just don't know about until you know. But so I think it'd be tough to even say, oh, here's some that we didn't cover, because that still wouldn't be all of them, right? So
absolutely, yeah, completely understand. But thank you for being able to get some stuff off the top of your head too. So before we close out, I wanted to ask if you have any final thoughts or advice you would like to share with the listeners.
If you are an entrepreneur, small business owner, however you want to refer to yourself, or just thinking about starting something, just take the first step, right? Or, again, if you've already started it, build a network. You've heard it probably 1,000 times, not what you know, it's who you know. Building those social networks is how you get things done, right? And that's how you're going to learn about some of these resources. But go out and look. If you don't think that there's resources to help you with your business in your community, I promise you're dead wrong. There are. So reach out, ask questions, just even ask another business owner. And entrepreneurs are always so willing to help, impart some advice that probably they wish that someone would have told them. And you just got to ask, and it's okay not to know, but just search, look, ask the questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alexces. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate it.
Now that we've learned about an ecosystem from a person who's building it, I'm going to link back up with Nick to clarify on some jargon and take a deeper dive into this ecosystem.
Caitlin, how was your conversation with Alexces?
We had a great time. It's sort of, I don't want to say the word derailed because that wasn't it. It was so productive. However, we just went off. I will wait to get into that first, but I want to get into my biggest takeaway.
Okay. What was it?
So my biggest takeaway is something of what she had said is that she's a communicator. She's a people builder. And what that said to me is that that's a fundamental of her. And I can see that even in myself as well. And then I see that again in a lot of entrepreneurs. But it seemed like at her core, she was a people person. And then it only made sense that she went into entrepreneurship and ecosystem building. So it was really fascinating to see that as a value and then be transformed into a career. So that was an observation I made. She was super cool to talk with, and she really embellished and went into that too.
Yes, insightful insightful insight, I guess. Yes, nice work, Caitlin. So what? How about jargon? Was there anything else? Was there anything you had to look up after the fact?
No, nothing to look up, but we talked a lot about Missouri SourceLink. She gave a ton of resources, like truly. So it was really cool to get to learn more about that. And so if anything, I would just recommend people do their search and look up that after this episode. Really recommend it.
Okay, nice. And then, so anything else? And I know what, how did the conversation get derailed? Like what?
All right, here we go. So the final thought and the derailing conversation, in a sense, is we talked about how social media has turned into advertising marketing, and how honestly it's the free option to begin with for any business to use. Any business can go start a web page, they can go and get started, and then work up to paying for advertising if that's what they so choose. We recently talked about how like TikTok, like businesses are using TikTok. And Nick, I wanted to bring this up too, but I remember, I did a throwback where I remembered when the president first had, because we were here before Twitter, Facebook, everything. But I remember when the president, Barack Obama, first had a Twitter and was like, why does a president have a Twitter? What is he using it for? And now we've gotten here where everyone has a Twitter, etc., social medias.
Yes, yeah. So do you listen to Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard? It's like,
no, I do not.
So do you know who Dax Shepard is? He's married to Kirsten Bell.
I know that they have a super cute relationship. Other than that,
yeah. So Dax is a famous podcaster, and Katie Couric was one of his first guests, and they were talking about just, I guess, new media and all of this. And Katie Couric said she got on Twitter. She was an early adopter onto Twitter, and her editor from ABC came and said there should be the Sunday night anchor should not be on Twitter. Delete your account. And that has aged terrible. Like every single, Twitter is made for journalists. But it is interesting how it's adapted and evolved, and where now where that's at in the market, that it's basically, especially for small businesses, small and new businesses, social media has just kind of been the vehicle, the advertising vehicle, and almost exclusive advertising vehicle.
Well, also, that was just such a fun also to catch up on that and to get your opinion. But that is all I had from the interview. If you have anything else, or if you want to go ahead and read us the outro.
Perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you for listening to today's episode of the Ecosystem Builder podcast, which is a product of mug.news and hosted by myself, Nick Kastner, and Caitlin Clays. If you have any questions about today's episode, connect with us on Twitter at Nick Kastner, at Clays Creates, or at Mug News Official. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share with your friends. We release episodes every single Wednesday morning, so make sure to follow so you don't miss a beat.